effort to pray, the songs of ascent, along with the whole Psalter, can be our teacher, enriching our prayer life with an ancient dialogue between the human and the divine. This is a journey, and it changes us. Psalm 122 shows us that this reorientation toward God will change the way we see others seeking Him also. I thought about this Song of Ascent title. Robert Alter sees a connection between the title note and the motif of pilgrimage in this psalm. He would even suggest that the ascents is referring to pilgrimage, and thus would be apt to name these songs of pilgrimage. This psalm joins a group of worshipers ascending from the gates of Jerusalem up to the place of God's dwelling. Let's read from the NIV. I rejoiced with those who said to me, "Let us go to the house of the Lord. Our feet are standing in your gates, Jerusalem. Jerusalem is built like a city that is closely compacted together. That is where the tribes go up, the tribes of the Lord, to praise the name of the Lord, according to the statute given to Israel. There stand the thrones for judgment, the thrones of the house of David. Pray for the peace of Jerusalem. May those who love you be secure. May there be peace within your walls and security within your citadels. For the sake of my family and friends, I will say, peace be within you. For the sake of the house of the Lord our God, I will seek your prosperity." Psalm 122 is the first in the Song of Ascents that has the superscript for or of David. There are 4 total with the same designation in this playlist of prayer. It's worth mentioning that the Hebrew is a bit ambiguous, as the preposition could connote ownership or dedication. These could be David's songs, as we know he was a musician and a songwriter. The NIV takes it that way, but Alter, among others, see it as a dedicatory statement, that the songs are written on his behalf. Whether we pray this psalm with David as songwriter or as song listener, we know he is intentionally woven in to the fabric of this psalm. So perhaps David is present as the psalmist or with the psalmist, embodied by this voice. I rejoiced with those saying to me, let's go to the house of the Lord. Recall David's enthusiasm as he was in the procession that relocated this house, or at least the throne of this house, aka the ark, into Jerusalem for the first time. He danced with all his might. I'm not much of a dancer myself, but I can't help but capture and feel a bit of his enthusiasm. I don't know what that looks like, to dance with one's might. In priestly garb, horns blowing, people shouting. It was a real party. I don't want to break up this imagery too much, but what if we felt that excited when we heard someone say, let's go to church? Do our hearts thrum with excitement and joy at the thought of the worship assembly? David's does. That is something we can learn from this prayer. Enthusiasm for gathering with others to attend to God. It's not an individual affair here, not a quiet act of solitary and sober people dragging their feet in shame toward the altar, convinced that solemnity is a display of devotion. This is a joyful conversation, the lightness of heart that only comes with the realization that God invites people to come close to Him. Let's go. The psalmist then reflects on the tangible journey toward the dwelling place of God. He and his party approach the place of God's presence. There's room here to see this as a psalm written after David's reign, in his honor, when the imagery house of the Lord would certainly be Solomon's incredible temple. Yet, on the way to the Temple Mount, the worship party passes through the city of the King, Jerusalem. There is sentimentality here as he reflects on the architecture of the city from a spiritual viewpoint. It is as if the city, by the way it is clustered together, sets the tone for what is happening as the festival procession grows. The imagery of worship motivates him to reflect about what is happening spiritually. People from all the tribes are being gathered together like these buildings in this tightly compacted town. Imagine if we romanticized our own worship assembly with such affection. Depending on the environment you worship in, You may find yourself praying as a member of a contemporary Christian worship procession with reflections like, "The auditorium is built with chairs tightly fit together. It is where the congregation pouring in to be together before God." I wonder if this psalm teaches us to renew our adoration of corporate worship gatherings. Your lovers is actually not referring to lovers of God. The Hebrew pronominal suffix that designates ownership is in the feminine. It matches Jerusalem. Hey, Jerusalem, may your lovers be at ease. To love Jerusalem? Is this love a love of the place, the walls, the buildings, the streets? Is it a love of the people, the worship festival, and those who have gathered together to be near God? Or is it a love for the instructions God has given, the establishment of an ordered way of life around his command, as the psalm mentions just prior? Is it a love of the history of what has happened here, as the psalmist reflects on the thrones, all those who have served in some form or fashion to provide this environment for Israel, the kings that have succeeded David, as generation after generation, God keeps his promise? Or is this a love of the city because of the one who has decided to locate his divine house within it, a love of the God of Jerusalem? Maybe it is all of these. As the psalmist weaves all of these into the worship song, when we love God, we begin to love what he loves. He loves what he sees here. The tight-knit city filled with people that want to be near him. The tight-knit society that assembled to carry out his way of life. The tight-knit throng of worshipers marching to lift up his name. It's no surprise that excitement for God leads to excitement about everything. There is enthusiasm for the whole thing. Would you assess your relationship with the stuff of worship? The places, the people, the program, the purpose? How can you pray with this kind of renewed enthusiasm about your church family gatherings? The song closes with well wishes, prayers for what God cares about. There's affinity for the place, the brothers and friends, for the gathering place God has appointed. The psalmist closes it with a mission statement of sorts. I will seek your good. The modus operandi of a worshiper of Yahweh is an orientation toward the good of the house of God. If we take this in light of New Testament revelation, we realize that the temple, God's house, is now the church body. Yes, the church body. The flawed, divisive, distracting, frustrated, unfocused, broken group of people we gather with to sing. Can you pray this with conviction? I will seek your good. It's not always easy, but this prayer will change you, and it will change your church. As we pray this Psalm of David's, along with Jesus, we may find out why Jesus' prayers on the eve of his trial were devoted toward the good and unity of his followers. When we draw close to God, we find ourselves closer to one another. Proximity with God and each other will recolor your world. Join in the joyous procession and feel the tight-knit warmth of a community of believers worshiping God together.